Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and this discussion, like most of them, is based on poll results that you vote on the discussion you want. And the Dutch Brexit monster didn't win this time. Never mind. I'll put it back up for the next one. So, what we're actually going to talk about is, well, why it is that Remainer cabinet ministers in particular seem to be supporting no deal, at the very least seem to be using the same sort of rhetoric. Now, throughout the Brexit process, it's worth bearing in mind a few things. Theresa May has made ministerial appointments not on the usual basis of, well, alleged competence to run big departments, never really worked out that way, but purely and quite openly in the interests of keeping a certain balance in cabinet of remain and leave. So it seems strange, therefore, that although the Prime Minister has appeared to forge full steam ahead with a sort of Brexit that would push us towards no deal, she has faced a barrage of public criticism from the half of the cabinet that supports Brexit, not the ones who were opposed to it. Now, this has been the sort of criticism that should normally get a minister fired. After all, not all prime ministers appoint their allies to cabinet. Sometimes they appoint rivals as well in order to keep them in check, because if there's one thing a minister is not supposed to do, it is sow dissension or even the threat of it in the party. They're not supposed to openly criticise the Prime Minister. But appointing the likes of Boris Johnson and David Davis to leading roles in the negotiations with the EU and wider world did nothing to stop them getting their excuses in early and attacking the Prime Minister at any given opportunity. But given that every step she has taken has led to the situation we're in now, where no deal is the inevitable result of the Brexit process, unless someone makes a dramatic U-turn, and that is entirely plausible. Don't imagine that there's just a thin chance of that. There is an absolute chance of that. But until it happens, or unless it happens, that's where we're heading, and it's her actions that have led us there. You'd have thought that the Remainers within Cabinet would be the critical ones. Now, we've moved from a position last summer where polls suggested that most people want a referendum on the final settlement, and just over half wanted to now remain with the EU, to less than 6 weeks away now where those numbers have just got higher and higher. But the Remainers within Cabinet have said nothing. When it's becoming obvious just how big an issue the Irish border was in making a Brexit deal, which not enough was made of at the time, it effectively makes Brexit, in the way that people imagine it, impossible. You'd have thought that the pro-EU ministers would have seized upon this. There are already enough people to make a reversal of the original referendum result highly likely. One reason why Brexiteers are dead set against it, of course, is because they also believe that they would lose another referendum. But emphasising the realities of the border conditions would sway even more. Indeed, if it was explained regarding borders in general, like the borders around mainland Britain, if it was actually explained by cabinet ministers what the realities of a no deal are in terms of getting fresh food into the country, in terms of getting medicines into the country and things like that, then surely even more would be persuaded of the futility, the fantasy notions of this Brexit project. So why aren't the Remain ministers, who are on the side of the majority of the Parliamentary Conservative Party in Westminster, making a fuss about it? After all, the Brexiteer leaders have been sending out messages to back their line throughout the process. It's the only message we have been getting from Parliament. And they've even ramped it up more recently when the Remain argument is starting to hold sway in the public, and without any government support at all. So why wouldn't Theresa May insist that she's going to make the will of the people happen, but push for a referendum so that people can choose the final settlement? Why wouldn't she just say that? Because that's an obvious thing to do at this point. Why did Sajid Javid, who is the Home Secretary now, a senior Remainer in Cabinet as well, say 2 weeks ago on television that technology could solve the border issues? He said there's already technology that can do that, when he knows it's completely untrue. There aren't. The accepted wisdom would seem to suggest in a situation like this that it's important at any time for a party to remain united, and much more so when the government is weak. And I'm sure there've been no end of party loyalty speeches to keep them from defying the Prime Minister. But senior Brexiteers, even those in Cabinet, have had no such qualms. Liam Fox was recently telling the press that his own MPs are trying to steal Brexit, stoking up anger against his own parliamentary colleagues, even within the Cabinet. Now recently, Javid said, whilst explaining why we shouldn't have another general election, he said that the people have given a clear mandate that we have to carry out. But he knows that it's not clear on any level. But most especially, the only Brexit that the Brexiteer groups actually campaigned for, namely a relationship in the single market, is the only one not currently on offer. There's no mandate at all for the current situation, and he not only knows it, but you'd think he'd love to take advantage of it to push his own wishes, but he doesn't. He toes the Brexiteer line just as his bosses, against all their political philosophies. So what's the reason for that? What's the reason for Hammond doing the same? What's the reason for every senior Remainer within the cabinet for doing this? For me, it only comes down to a few possibilities. There's sort of 5 things, any combination of which may explain it for each individual. 1, genuine concern about a split to the party. Now, the referendum, bear in mind, was only offered in the first place because David Cameron, who was the previous Prime Minister, had no control over his parliamentary party. So it seems that it wasn't his own personal paranoia, it's obviously shared by others in the party. He also felt that even by sharing it, well, it is alleged anyway, it's people sort of describe it as, oh, he thought he would win it easily. Well, there was that arrogance to it as well. But it went even before that. If you believe what Donald Tusk says about private meetings with him, David Cameron didn't think he'd even have to offer the referendum, really, because he didn't think he'd win a majority in Parliament and therefore have to carry out his manifesto promises. So, fears of splits of the party. Secondly, although the Conservative leadership was against leaving the EU, the party itself is split on the issue, even though not down the middle. And MPs were given free rein to campaign for whichever side they wished. There were no party lines on this. That is in stark contrast to Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party, the largest parties in Westminster at the time, who all held an official position of opposing breaking away from the EU. As a result, the Conservatives probably feel a greater sense of ownership over Brexit, as they rightly should. It's their referendum, and also their party wasn't, well, it was actually split across both campaigns. It was theirs in the first place. They have ownership of it. And, of course, they are still the government. 3, it could be personal ambition. Now, given the events of recent years, you could be forgiven for thinking that there's an even split on the issue of Europe in the Conservative Party, or even a majority in favour of breaking away from the EU. But that's not the case. Although there are plenty of Tory MPs who wanted to get an even better deal out of membership than we already have, and had no qualms about grubbing votes by bashing Europe at every opportunity, the majority certainly didn't want to see us leave under any circumstances, much less these. As such, when there's another leadership contest, which, can't be that far away, another year maybe, then you've generally got to assume that the most likely candidate would be a Europhile as opposed to a Eurosceptic. There would be more support within the parliamentary party. That is, of course, assuming that they don't make the same sort of mistakes that the Republicans did during the last presidential primaries, where they split their vote across too many candidates. So assuming they don't do that, the chance of a Brexiteer becoming the next leader is unlikely. So the next leader of the Conservative Party is very likely to be pro-EU, just as the last lot have been. Theresa May is, even though that's not the way she's going as Prime Minister. David Cameron was, John Major was, Margaret Thatcher was. They're the only ones I remember. I've not been alive for the others. And of course, Ted Heath before that, inevitably was. He's the one who took us into Europe in the first place. So there's a long line of that. So as such, you can imagine anyone with ambitions for the top job, and Javid is definitely one of those people, has a fine line to walk between trying to show leadership, or at least pretending to, and not doing or saying anything that could be attacked as threatening the unity of the party. The fourth possibility is that there will be hostility in the media for anyone who steers away from a hard Brexit. And MPs do fear our newspapers. Might seem baffling for some other countries where their press have laws to abide by, but ours don't really. They have a voluntary code of conduct. Politicians almost never see it as worthwhile attacking the media, choosing instead to appease it where they can. So it might be fear of vilification in the press, keeping them on the side of their opponents in the party, annoyingly. And the fifth, it could be, though it's almost certainly too fanciful, that there is a bit of a conspiracy going on and they're all in on some running down the clock strategy and then averting the whole thing. I don't believe that. The problem with that idea is, although it might be demonstrating the futility of Brexit to many people, remember the number of people being polled that said they would now vote to remain is just increasing all the time. Allowing Brexiteer Tories to be the only ones presenting their arguments to the public will do nothing to unite the nation, especially when known Remainers are also following that same line and saying those same things when asked. In addition, with each passing week, we are permanently losing more and more businesses which used to or were going to trade in the UK. So even if we cancelled Article 50 right now, which of course we're not going to, permanent damage has already been done to our economy as a result of this. The idea that there's some grand plan, which they're managing to keep to themselves and not letting out, would hinge on some intelligence behind it, but that is clearly not the case. In addition, even if there were some good reason to keep quiet in order to play down divisions in the party, which are still readily apparent, then why not at least keep that silence? How does it serve any purpose to come out and say, oh, there's absolutely a solution to the border problems, we can use technology that already exists? Or, oh, we're going to be all right with no deal if we have to. We'd like a deal, but if we can't have one, it's not a big deal. Or that we'd be able to get all our trade agreements in place by the 29th of March. I mean, that is another laughable moment from recent times. With about 4 trade agreements, not trade deals, mind you, just simple agreements, which are literally just copied and pasted from the ones we have existing as members of the EU that, you know, those countries have agreed to and we've signed up to. Out of the 40 that we're losing with a no-deal Brexit, Cabinet ministers have been saying it's basically going to be touch and go, getting it all done by the March 29th. Now, if someone says, oh, it's a bit touch and go getting it done by March 29th, to me, what that means is we expect, well, there's a good chance we'll make that deadline, but maybe we'll need another week. That's not the case. We don't have a cat in hell's chance. I don't know of even any other agreements that are imminent. It may well be that in the 6 weeks' time, we still only have those 4. I mean, you know, there might be a couple more imminent that I don't know about. But the other thing is, I mean, we're certainly not going to get those 40. How does it take 2 years, or 2.5 years really, to get 4, and then suddenly just 6 weeks to get the other 36? I mean, yeah, you could argue, oh, well, maybe they're all in the process. Then why aren't we hearing about it? Why isn't anyone saying anything about it? Because all of these agreements that have been signed, we knew about it before they were officially signed, because they take photos as press events, stuff like that. You get to hear about it. And the thing is, even if those claims completely ignore the fact that that we haven't got a chance of making those ones then, that is also still ignoring as well our most important trading partners, namely the EU, where we're not even trying to get an agreement at the moment because Theresa May can't get the deal that would allow for that through Parliament, and she's not abandoning it and going for another line. So I can't help but return to the main point here. We have a majority of Tory MPs who would desperately love it if Brexit were reverted. If only they couldn't be blamed for it. And the fear of blame is likely to be the sword of Damocles that every MP is conscious dangling above their heads. In Labour, as well as the Conservatives. Although we know that there's a much greater appetite for averting this in Labour, not the leadership unfortunately, but the rest of the party, they don't want to stand up and say, look, we should just avert Brexit. What they are pushing for is that the people should choose again. No one really wants to stand. And that is this fear that all MPs have about what the media would say about them, about just being seen to be derailing the will of the people, because until there's another vote, the will of the people as it exists is for Brexit. That's the issue. But they're not pressuring May. You know, for the obvious face-saving way out of another referendum, you know, which would solve the problem, when there is no deal to go ahead with. It would be so easy for them to just say, look, we haven't got a deal. None of you voted for no deal. So we're going to put a more sophisticated vote to you so you get to choose what you want. You know, do you want to stay? Do you want to leave? And if you do want to leave, do you want to leave with no deal? Do you want to leave with the... Because if she puts that on the referendum and says, do you want to leave with my deal? And they vote for that, well, Parliament would then have to back it, wouldn't they? You know, instead of just repeating Brexiteer lies, which don't do their position any good at all. There is talk about rebelling against Theresa May in order to steer us away from no Brexit. I talked a little bit about that yesterday. But let's say that happens. And for me, that's a big if. I'm not really seeing it. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I don't rate the chances above 50% without something tangible happening. It just sounds like whinging to me. But let's say they did. That would just raise more questions for me. Because if they're actually willing to take the reins from the Prime Minister, then that suggests that there isn't a plan, secret or otherwise, to avert this no deal. Now, if that's the case, if there isn't a plan, it's even more baffling that they've been going along with the Brexiteer narrative all this time. And this, for me, is one of the most perplexing things. So, I mean, I don't have an answer as to why these particularly senior Remainers, unless it is just personal ambition and they fear what the papers will say about them. Or that they just fear, I mean, the big bogeyman for them, of course, is Jeremy Corbyn. Ordinarily, of course, Conservatives no party wants to be out of power, and no Conservative governments want Labour in power. But Jeremy Corbyn is their particular bogeyman, and maybe the other line of it is, it's better for us, maybe they're all, I talked about potentially Theresa May, only potentially, it's 50-50 for me. I talked about in a video a couple of days ago. Potentially willing to crash out if she thinks it saves the party. Maybe some more of those think the same thing. Maybe they're all of the same mind. That's again, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. Every time I think of a possibility, I just think to myself, no, that doesn't make sense for intelligent people. And they are intelligent people. Sometimes I might accuse some of these people of being naive. Some MPs are thick, don't get me wrong. But when you're talking like the likes of Theresa May and Sajid Javid, even Jacob Rees-Mogg, he's no mug, he's not an idiot, and Boris Johnson, they're not stupid people. They may be naive from time to time, they may make misjudgments, but they're not stupid people. And for Javid and May in particular, I can understand maybe a little bit Philip Hammond, because he's a very quiet, for someone in such a senior position as Chancellor of the Exchequer, he is almost second to the Prime Minister, pretty much is second to the Prime Minister. It's a very senior position within the Cabinet. You don't hear very much about him or from him. And I think it's because I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a clue, because he had very, very strong opposition to leaving the EU. And he seems to have been slapped down as a result of it. There is certainly some belief within the government that being seen to frustrate Brexit is somehow going to either wreck their party or, even if it keeps the party together, wreck their chances of holding on to power. And the last thing they want is a Jeremy Corbyn government. So it may be down to that as well. But there we go. It's worth discussing it because for me, it's one of the most maddening things about the whole process. Why don't the majority of the Conservative Party make as much fuss? Because, you've got on the one hand, senior Brexiteers in cabinet and outside perfectly willing to throw their propaganda out to the people. Well, why don't the Remainers feel comfortable doing exactly the same thing? There's more of them. They drown them out. But they don't. So anyway, hope you found the video interesting at least, even if there was no real conclusion at the end. Sorry about that. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification. And until next time, I'll see you later.